We're joined for our interview this month by Andrew Gotch. Now, Andrew, I'm just going to go through my list of things about you. Former Assistant Director Inspector of Taxes, former tax partner in a small firm of accountants, co-founder of Professional Tax Practice, CIOT Fellowship Thesis Prize winner, currently Chairman of the CIOT SME subcommittee. It seems you're a fairly sensible person to talk to on TaxTV about tax. My first question is extremely simple, I hope, for you. You wrote an article in 2002, 10 years ago, you wrote an article called The Going Gets Tougher. My question, I guess, is it still getting tougher out there for people?
I think that the answer at the moment is yes. I think that the revenue are struggling to find their feet and their direction to meet the targets that were set them in the Central Spending Review a little while ago now. And they only have until 2014-15 to make £7.5 billion worth of extra money from their compliance activity that is funded by the 900 million that they were actually given. So I think any normal person would be feeling a bit tense and would be thinking, right, you know, how can I use my vast powers in order to reach that goal? So yes, I think you're.
And the 7.5 million, that's not because £7.5 billion. That's not because tax rates have gone up. That's not because they're changing rules. That's purely money that they weren't collecting before, that now the government would like them to collect.
That is compliance gain. In other words, they have to show the compliance initiatives that they have put in place and the additional yield on top of what they'd have collected anyway that they can attribute to the compliance activities that they've chosen. And so at the moment, as I say, they have various initiatives and all of those are very much in the testing phase. And no doubt they'll become testing for taxpayers in the not too distant future. But
yes.
That's where we currently are.
One of the ones that I think you're actually involved in yourself is the idea of the alternative dispute resolution. We were talking about that earlier in the programme, and I'm yet to be persuaded the alternative dispute resolution is not just an alternative to dispute resolution. Is it something people should be getting involved in?
I think it very much is. I've been involved in the pilot for SME dispute resolution ever since it started back in early 2011, and the results have actually been very encouraging. And the point of dispute resolution, I suppose, is to try and obviate the need for taxpayers always to have to take their appeals to tribunals, which is an enormously expensive and time-consuming and indeed in some cases risky undertaking, because notoriously one can never predict what the judges are actually going to say. You hope that you know, but you really don't. And ADR allows you a neutral space, I suppose, where your dispute is not arbitrated, but it is reviewed by an independent third party. And you are invited to consider your position, the other person's position, and try to come to a negotiated agreement, which might be different from the one that a tribunal has imposed, but nonetheless one that is mutually satisfactory, so that you can obviate all the cost and hassle that would otherwise follow from an appeal going through normal statutory channels. It's been an extremely successful initiative in the large business field, and I think with the large business field it is certainly there to stay. Large businesses are very used to dispute resolution and mediation in particular in the context of their commercial affairs. For the SME sector, they're possibly less familiar with it, and it's the SME sector which the pilot is currently focusing on, trying to sort of road test the idea and see whether it works.
And are they finding, from what we were saying earlier on, they're finding it quite difficult to find people who are prepared to go through the process?
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of resistance from not just taxpayers, but also, strangely, advisors to the idea of dispute resolution at the sort of lower end of the scale, in other words, sort of small SME disputes. And that is partly, I think, attributable to the fact that the independent third parties are actually drawn from Hmrc, and so everyone always feels, well, you know, how on earth can you have an independent person coming from Hmrc to adjudicate a dispute fairly? But in the first phase pilot, which looked at 180 cases, and those were cases that had run into the sand as far as debate was concerned, they were all chosen from cases where appealable decisions had been issued and they were being looked at by review teams. In not a single case was there a complaint about a lack of impartiality. Every single party, every single taxpayer seemed to be happy that the process was an independent one. So these facilitators, as they're known, who are trained in mediation techniques, are actually doing an astonishingly good job in maintaining an independent and neutral environment for the dispute resolution process to happen. And when you look at the stats that came out of the first phase pilot, of all the cases that were looked at, 60%, and remember these were cases that were on their way to appeal, so they were facing monster costs and hassle and all the rest of it, 60% of those cases resolved to the satisfaction of both sides. And that is a tremendously high strike rate, very, very successful. And I would certainly advise any advisors watching to review their case files where they have debates with the revenue that they feel are becoming unproductive or have just stopped, and see whether or not they should put them forward for ADR. My advice would always be that that should be an option, and I think going forward it's just going to become part of every advisor's toolkit that you consider your options for ADR as you are moving through the process.
Right. So you think that we could be in a position where it stops being the alternative dispute resolution, it becomes the way we do it?
I think so, and it's very interesting. You may be aware, and I'm sure your audience will also be aware, that there is something called the single compliance process that is being trialled at various places in the UK at the moment. And the SCP, I'm also on the project team for that, I wonder if I get any work done sometimes, but the SCP is the sort of new one-size-fits-all approach to tax inquiry across the board, via direct and indirect taxes. Whenever you have an inquiry, broadly speaking, the SCP is the behavioural model, if you like, that the revenue intend, if again it satisfies its pilot criteria, but it looks like it will do, the revenue intend that should be the model going forward for inquiry. And it is predicated really on the basis of collaborative working, everybody getting on and moving through the process in double quick time and so on and so forth. There is, of course, the hidden sharp stick of the aggressive legislation in Schedule 36 should things run into the sand, but the intention certainly is that it should be a much cleaner process for both sides, I suppose. And it has been very interesting to see that they realise that, of course, there is always the possibility that where you are moving fast, technical debate is something which you just don't really have time for, and so people might start taking, a positional negotiating stance and sort of tomatoes debate and so on and so forth, which of course will completely stymie any chance of the SCP working within its, sort of intended time criteria. And so they have accepted that ADR has to become a part of that process. They see it as an automatic bolt-on, I suppose, to resolve those sorts of disputes. So it really is something that I think we're going to see a lot more of, as long as we can get the second pilot phase to demonstrate that it is financially viable for HMRC. Everything is about money in HMRC at the moment, and it is very important, I think, that we as professionals get behind the ADR project and put forward as many suitable cases as we can find for dispute resolution.
And so, as you say, the idea could well be in the future that as we speed through the process, the slightest sign of there might be a disagreement coming up, we can immediately go into this alternative dispute resolution and resolve it quickly, cheaply. Something I can't get my head around, perhaps you'll be able to explain it, is that if we go for this particular resolution technique, there's this wonderful idea of mutual satisfaction and all this sort of thing. And the problem with that is that seems to sort of fly in the face of the litigation settlement strategy, which was all about make sure we get everything, and if we're not going to get everything, walk away and get nothing. It seems to be a very different tack, does it not?
Yes, the LSS doesn't on the face of it seem to fit. I mean, when it came in, I think most people saw it as a policy of always going for the maximum sustainable claim, and as a result a large number of disputes of all sizes promptly ran into the sand and made no further progress, and indeed a lot of them are still there. HMRC have certainly taken some strides in the direction of making it, slightly less of a straitjacket, I suppose, for inspectors in the field. But nonetheless, in order to be acceptable for ADR, they do have to fall within the parameters of the LSS. I suppose that the knowledge of what the LSS actually means and how it works is something that is in the possession of so few people inside HMRC that my advice would always be that if you were looking at a case and think, no, when you look at the published guidelines, this is probably going to fall outside the scope of the LSS and so therefore ADR won't be available, don't make the decision yourself. Phone up the ADR team and they will put it forward to the ADR panel, which is comprised of people from the dispute resolution unit who actually have operational responsibility for running the LSS. And so you will get an extremely informed view and an explanation. It may well be that you would be able to redefine, I suppose, the cause of your dispute to bring it within the scope of the LSS.
Talking about this idea of independence, we touched earlier on the fact that although is it the facilitator, is that the phrase?
Yeah.
Although the facilitators come from the revenue, you're comfortable with the level of independence. I just want to throw a quote at you, which is from Anthony Thomas in his, I think we call it the inaugural address or something like that. But he refers to being concerned about an increasingly powerful HMRC, which should not be allowed to act as a prosecutor, jury, judge and executioner. Obviously, you are the chairman of the SME subcommittee at the CIOT. What role does the CIOT take in the things that we're talking about today? Generally, I mean, I pay my subs and then I wonder what I get for it, I guess.
Well, I suppose like so many things which seem to be there is an enormous amount of paddling just beneath the surface. And I do a great deal of that paddling myself. I suppose in this past year, Anthony Thomas's presidency has been a real barnstormer, really. He has made people wake up and reassess their relationships, both inside and outside the revenue. What he was concerned about is that the relationship was becoming a bit too cosy and a bit too much driven by HMRC. And one only has to look back at the sort of legislation that we have been faced with on the compliance side since Finance Act 2007 and Schedule 24 to see which way the sort of legislative drift is going in terms of compliance. And I think that he was right to say that there was a risk that the professional bodies were starting to lose their grip as someone with a voice in that environment. And what I think Anthony has done is give professional bodies the courage and, to an extent, the locus standi to have their say about these issues, which potentially have the most enormous impact, especially on the compliance side. And this year, we have had real success in that sort of context. We have had the business record checks consultation, which I've been involved in, where HMRC actually stopped what they were doing, unbelievably, and went back and thought about it. And it looks like, in consultation with us, I was up at Bush House just yesterday in yet another round of debate about just how exactly this was going to work in practice. It looks like we are going to come out with something that is functional and that actually does what everybody would no doubt accept was satisfactory, which is improve general standards of record keeping without making it a case of records obsession. And also without the threat of penalties hanging over the merest failure to keep records and so on and so forth. So I think it's what he has done is allow that to push forward. It is so important for the PBs, the professional bodies, to be involved in that process. And I think that Anthony, with his very public and admirable stand on that and other issues, has really put us in a position where we are listened to, as we should be, far more than was the case before. And it's certainly an initiative that needs to be pushed forward.
And do you think that the other institutes and associations could learn a lesson from the CIOT?
That probably the best answer to that is to recall what Anthony Thomas said to me at one point, which was that on his tour, because obviously the President has to go around and see everybody in the country, and on many of the occasions when he has been talking to CIOT members, they have expressed the view that they wished that their own professional institutes were taking a similar stand because they thought it was admirable.
My next question, interestingly, was to say, do you think we're moving back towards a period of us and them? But actually, from what you're saying, the CIOT is working against that.
Well, I'm not sure whether it's quite true to say that we are working against it. I think that, in fact, us and them is the only place it can ever be, because they run the law to which we're all subject. It's really just a case of it was becoming them. What we're trying to do is to make it more us and them by having a bigger role and a more important role in formulating, well, not necessarily formulating policy, but certainly formulating the response to policy that they actually have to work with in practice. And that, especially nowadays, when you see the vast amount of legislation that is being put in place.
To move on to your day job, if you like, and to talk about your new business, having obviously been a tax consultant for a good number of years, we'll leave it at that simply. You've now set up TaxAction, which is, well, perhaps you could explain what you're going to be doing. Well,
we act for professional firms primarily, and the phone rings in our office when people are perhaps faced with a transaction that their clients are thinking of undertaking, and they just need to make sure they've covered all the bases, or perhaps it's a transaction that they've not been involved with before, perhaps a company sale or a demerger, and they need some hand-holding, I suppose, to put it in a better way, and we're prepared to do that in any way that suits. We will either come in and run the transaction and advise you, or we will sit in the background and just advise. We will meet anyone you want us to meet. We also do a great deal of work in Hmrc inquiries. Very often, I say a lot of our work involves sorting people's messes out, because inquiries are notoriously difficult to deal with very often. Many of our consultants not only have a revenue background, but have years of experience of successful resolution of these sorts of disputes. And so, again, we're able to provide a marvellously good service and a very cost-effective service in those sorts of areas as well.
Okay, so it's the remote tax partner in some respects.
Yes, well it is. I often said that we're like having a sort of barristers' chambers, I suppose. Sorry, the Bar Council, but sitting behind you in your sort of small or medium-sized firm. And a lot of our clients are actually tax partners themselves, and they still find it useful to have someone that they can refer to and discuss points with, and sort of maybe get an alternative take on the treatment that they're taking, or identify areas of risk that they may not have thought of, or whatever. And people need certainty about that, and so we decided that we would have a business model that was more fee-based. We thought also that we should give guarantees of customer service, which is, strangely enough, I mean, perhaps because it's just axiomatic that in the world of tax, customer service is always the very highest order, but we thought that we should actually give guarantees of service. So in other words, if we fail to meet deadlines that we've agreed, and it's our fault that we have done, we discount the fee by 50%. If the advice that we give, the written advice that we give falls below the standard to which our clients ought to be entitled, given the sort of very blue chip nature of the consultants that we're using, then we'll waive the fee completely. So, we felt there was room for a new model, and so that's what we're doing. So it's TaxAction Consulting, taxation.org.uk, if I may just do a little bit of outrageous plugging, and give us a call. We're on free phone. We're 0800 222 992, so nice and easy to remember. And we'd love to hear from you. Okay, those details on the screen as well for you at the moment. Something to pick up on, it's obviously you and a lot of the people who were involved in professional tax practice historically, but your new, I'm not sure if I should say business partner, I'm not sure how it works, but Dave Smith is now involved as well. Yes, he is. Who brings something different to the table? Well, he does. Not only does he bring his marketing muscle, but obviously he, and know-how generally, but he brings to us years of experience as an advisor, and of course of running successful tax consultancy companies. He set up account tax, who many of your audience will remember are the IR35 specialists who took Arctic Systems through. So yes, it's a new and revamped business, I suppose you should say, and we have a very wide range of knowledge base within our firm. We deal with pretty well every area of tax, unless what you want to hear about is petroleum revenue tax or tonnage tax, and we may even be able to offer some tonnage tax expertise soon, in fact. But right across the board, direct, indirect taxes, SDLT, inheritance tax, all of these areas which are usually, they don't come up all the time, but when they do, they're almost invariably high value and difficult. We have a large range of consultants who have been in the field for years. They're all extremely highly qualified, both professionally and by experience. It's a fantastic facility.
Andrew Gotch, thank you very much indeed.
That's a pleasure, thank you.